this talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that presentation, which is where he discusses model selection and sparsity. Like a review, a refresher sort of a thing. Is that okay? As in, are you guys all comfortable with model selection? Or would you benefit from a review? Because that will put automatic relevance determination in context. So should I go over this part? Like we'll go through quickly. If you have any questions, you can ask. Is that okay? Okay. So yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to review this, and then I'm going to I'll just explain what automatic relevance determination is, and then I'll give an example from my research how I use automatic relevance determination in sparsity. Right?
Will these slides be available afterwards?
Yes. So this slide is already available. This is the talk given on March 3rd. I have another set of slides where I'm going to talk about ARD and my research. But yeah, it needs a little bit more polishing. So, but I will put it up online. Okay, so let's start talking about. So yeah, I'm going to go through this quickly. So the main problem of model selection is, and in the context of linear models. So suppose you have a model like that, which is y is x beta plus epsilon. So and then where beta, where xi's are your regressors, you can also call them predictors, you can call them covariates, and then betas are your coefficients. And then the question is, which regressors do you include in the model? So, and like Tom covered this example in the case of the OASIS brain data, where you have what you're interested in is the volume of a certain structure in the brain, in this case the hippocampus, and then you have all these other variables, right? You have age, you have MMSE, which is like a clinical test, that's clinical score which you get, and it's correlated to Alzheimer's disease. The CDR, TIB, and you have all these variables, and you want to ask volume is correlated to or can be modeled as a function of which of these variables? Do I include all of them? Do I include some of them? And how do you reach that conclusion, right? And then, so yeah, and you start with this sort of you start with heuristics. You say, okay, we know that volume decreases with age, and it's true in healthy people and it's true with diseased people. It just turns out that people with disease turn out to lose volume much faster, right? And you want to be able to check that. And then you also know that if the volume is much lower, it's associated with cognitive decline, as measured by these clinical variables, right? So yeah, if you have any questions at any point, just stop me, and then yeah, we can have a discussion. Right, so the question is, should we include all of them? Should we include some of them? Can we include all of them and then select some of them? That's the goal of sparsity, is that you want a sparse representation of the variables of interest, and which should explain my data, right? Right, so the issue with including all the variables we have is that we overfit. It's a possibility that we'll overfit, and every extra parameter we add, it just requires more data to be able to estimate. So this is especially important because in my research I work with shapes. I look at longitudinal shape analysis, and I want to ask the same question: is shape change? What variables of interest influence shape change? So I have age, I have clinical score, I have all these variables, and shape is a very high dimensional variable, right? Is a very high dimensional response variable, and then if I want to be able to estimate coefficients related to shape change, it's proportional to that dimension. So that's the problem of adding more and more variables. And then, so Tom covered this. The other way to look at like selecting certain variables is through p-values, right? You can, so for instance, but the thing is, let's add one thing at a time. If we say that volume is a function of age, you fit a linear model, so LM is the function in R. I guess you might have already used that. And then you can see that you have the intercept, these are the coefficients of the line, this tells me the standard error, this is the statistic, and then these tell me how significant they are to the model, right? And then you can select an alpha level of significance, 0.05, 0.01, and you can say this is significant, this is not, right? And it turns out, in this case, age is significant, yeah? But then what happens, yeah, so this is how, so, and that, basically that's just the intercept and slope which you compute. So a point to note here, I can also add, so when I say regressors, you can also add higher orders of, like you can add polynomials, right? You can also say, right, so in this model, for instance, x2 could be x1 squared, x3 could be x1 cubed, and so on. And then you can ask, do I have a better fit as a polynomial, as do I want to go higher order? That is also a regressor, and you can ask, is it really necessary to include that coefficient, right? So if you think this line is too simplistic a model, you can go for a more complex model, you can ask that question, right? Is all this clear? Is there any questions at any point? So then, yeah, now if you add sex effect, this also turns out to be significant. Actually, okay.
Yeah, you had a problem with the slides.
Yeah, oh.
That's 9.09, which is
Oh.
not significant.
Okay, fine. Well, yeah, it's you can just set whatever value you want, and you can. Anyway, yeah, okay. So, but no, the main point here is that if I add more variables, and suddenly age becomes age is no more significant. Yeah, if you set a 0.05 level of significance, it's no more significant. So then, which models do you trust? I mean, you can come up with so many solutions to the same problem, and then yeah, it's very easy to, you can determine what answer you're looking for, and you can make a selection of model which suits your purpose, and that's not a good way to go about it. But yeah, a lot of people already do that, and based on p-values. And yeah, so this is just another example there. So yeah, so this is an important point to make, is that yeah, so you need a systematic and automatic method for selecting models, and it should be decided before analysis, right? And yeah, you can choose based on. So I won't go into R squared. Yeah, but this is the other thing, that you have all these variables, but you want to be able to choose the simplest model which explains your data. So that's the principle of Occam's razor. But at the same time, you don't want it to be too simple. There should be a balance, and your model should be able to select that. So yeah, there are various ways to do that. So yeah, so AIC is a model selection criteria, and this is actually not simplification. This is just written in a different way. It's I think the sparse representation L0 norm, which you minimize if you add that penalty function, and I think it's there later in the slides. But then this basically says, let's see, minimize AIC, which means you minimize number of parameters, case number of parameters, and you maximize the likelihood. So if you maximize the likelihood, minimize the number of parameters, And yeah, it's a trade-off. And then based on AIC value, you can say, okay, what is the model? But then the thing with AIC is when I'm dealing with univariate data, if my response is just univariate, and I have say 10 covariates or 10 variables, this is easy to do because it's more of a checking. You check 2 power 10 models and you decide, okay, these have lowest AIC, so these will be good enough. But then as you increase the number of variables, it's a very hard thing to check every model, right? The other issue with this is that now if I'm dealing with shape, shape is a very high dimensional representation. To even check one model takes some time. So AIC is not, I mean, you need a different version of AIC, and yeah, it's not the best way to look for that high dimensional data. But then this is one way people look at Kooky information criteria. I'm not going to go into this. Yeah, okay, this is I'm sure Tom's talking about all this. Yeah, so this is an example where you can, the Feynman IC is the R package, and then you can include all the variables in your data, and then you can see that this package picks, ranks models based on AIC value. Okay. So we will see that this model is also picked by other sparse sparse representation of models. So, right, so this is, I don't know whether you can see this. Can you see this? Okay. So what does this say? It says, yeah, so it says that all, like for instance, if you choose that AIC, if you choose the number 1, AX, CDR, ETLE, and then estimate a model, it turns out that the LME will give you these as significant. Okay? Linear model gives you. Okay. Right, so, and this is where, so these are different sparse models. So, okay, so here's where, so you can write down, so you want to, I want to say that I want to minimize the distance of x beta from my data, and then I also want to put a sparse representation of my parameters, right? So this would be beta 0, beta 1, you can put whatever penalty you want. And so this L0 now will effectively give you AIC, right? Right? Okay. The L1 norm is also, it's called the lasso estimator. I think there's a picture later, and I'll show you that. And this is another sparse representation. But if I'll just actually put up a chalk.
It's in the drawers.
Yeah, so this picture, right? So the LC, I mean, this is what we want to achieve, the black curve for sparsity. It says that. So yeah, what is the point of sparsity? The point of sparsity is you don't want variables. So you want to fit a model with only the right variables, right? So so post analysis, if that variable does not make any sense to you, just want to get rid of it. So Bayesian ridge regression, what it does is it's still, even though it penalizes smoothly all the coefficients, there is still some effect in the model, meaning it's not zero completely. So it still has an influence on the model. But then the question is, when you're talking about cause-effect relationships, you say that this variable is only influenced by these. So the best thing you would want is push that to 0, right? You want to push effects of certain variables to 0. Otherwise, you don't want it in the model at all, even with a small value. And that's what this is doing. So the best case scenario is the black curve, the black line, which is put a penalty, and then at 0, which is a 0. But then all these other sparse model is, the problem with that is it's hard to optimize, right? So all these other sparse representation is trying to get as close to that black curve as possible, right? The penalty functions. So ARD, automatic relevance determination, is one of those terms. So here you have, the log penalty. So this is, it comes from this adaptive sparsity where you have, so here you have beta, so beta is my weight vector for my linear model, and then which is a function of Gaussian 0 and tau. Tau is my variance. And then the way you would have done that, the way you specify a prior is you do a hierarchical prior, you also specify a prior on tau, right? And in this case, tau is the Jeffreys type prior. It's a parameter-free prior, and then when you marginalize out tau, it gives you a log prior, and that is actually very, very nice approximation or representation. It's not an approximation, but then it's getting as close to that black curve as possible. So the point to note here is that the ultimate goal, in all these cases, what I'm doing is I'm trying to find out what P of beta is, right? So what am I doing? I'm marginalizing out tau. I'm saying, let me write this down. So I have P of beta. Is this big enough? You can write it down as which is an integral, right? Okay. Tau, I would say, is an R plus. Right? Is this okay? So, what are you doing with all these sparsity priors? You're saying this has some form, and then you're ultimately you're either finding P of beta or you're finding the posterior map estimate of beta. That's what you're doing. But in this process, you're marginalizing out tau. You're getting rid of tau. And your focus is on beta. In ARD, and we will come to that, we would not compute P of beta. We are not marginalizing out tau. Instead, we are getting an estimate for tau, right? We're getting an estimate for tau, and then approximating beta. Like, again, lab estimate for beta. Yeah, you're finding a maximum likelihood estimate for tau. You're not saying that I want to integrate P of tau, because in many cases that integral is not going to be solvable. It's hard to make that, do that integration. Does that make sense? So in this case, for instance, I have Jeffreys prior, right? And here you're saying map estimation of beta by EM algorithm. But this involves knowing what P of beta is, or finding an approximation for the P of beta, right? So, and that we are going to come to. Right. Right. So now coming to polynomial regression, because this is what. Yeah. So you can do ordinary least squares, and this you guys might have done as, I don't know. Did you do it as part of an assignment, or
You just demoed it.
In the lecture.
okay? So yeah, the reason why I'm showing his slides was that I was trying to add to his slides, and I faced a lot of trouble with sweep. So and then I couldn't add it, I couldn't compile it on my computer and my lab computer, and so therefore I have two sets of templates. I just wanted to use some of his slides for my presentation, but then anyway, so which is why I'm skipping over the slides. Okay. Right. So then, yeah, for ordinary least squares here, it's a 10th order OS, but effectively it's a 3rd order polynomial. Meaning the coefficients, many of them towards the end are just 0. That's the setup he's done. I think he used to have code which showed you what the parameters are. But then, yeah, as you increase the order of the polynomials, you can just make it overfit the data, right? But then Bayesian ridge regression gives you such an estimate. Bayesian ridge regression does a good job. I mean, that's not the point, but then in this case, also you get a nice curve, and more importantly, whatever coefficients don't matter just go up to 0. It just says 5th order is sufficient, but in ridge regression you have coefficients for other things also. Right. And even in case of automatic relevance determination, things are going to look like this. Okay. It's just another way to do sparsity. So, right. I finished that very quickly. Okay. I don't think I have enough material, but that's it. Is that clear? As in, are there any questions from here? As in, comments, like clarifications?
I guess I'm not exactly clear on how I would implement beta sparse.
Right. So.
Like, I don't think I know it well enough to.
Right. No, I understand. But I can point you to this paper. So. No, I mean, it's not hard. So the thing is, you would just replace a lot of the estimates. So you're computing beta hats at a lot of places, right? Or beta posterior has a nice Gaussian form. So in this case, that's what the beta hats would change. The way you would compute that would change. In the process, you would have other parameters which you have to estimate. So you just have that small function to compute ridge regression that will just be replaced by another function. And this paper is very clear. This is the Figueredo paper where this, and I think the adaptive sparsity package does that. Would go into details about how that, but then it just gets messy. Right. So, just another point is that in this paper, he doesn't choose a Gaussian prime. He also talks about this Laplacian prime as a sparse, prime, right? That's just another. It looks like. So it looks like this. So if my log penalty looks like this, my Laplacian prior will look like this, something like that. It's somewhere in the middle.
So where do you use the penalty function?
Where do you use the penalty function?
Yeah. So it said the penalty function is like the log of beta, the log of probability beta.
Well, that's for the Jeffreys prior. The way it comes out is the log of P of beta.
So is it basically you're just trying to minimize your penalty? Is that the goal?
No, so you're not minimizing the penalty. You are. So penalty is an added term to your. Ultimately, the goal is you also want to fit the data, and the penalty is an extra constraint, and you're trying to balance both constraints.
Is it like a prior?
Yeah, it is like a prior, but it's a question of whether you want to look at it as a optimization problem or a probabilistic, right? So, yeah, and looking at it as a probabilistic model has its advantage. You have a posterior distribution, you can do a lot more, you can do prediction. There are lots of advantages of doing that. But yeah, the penalty function is like a constraint. Or yeah, you could, as a prior, you won't say, I want, or I know that my model should be like this.
So it's an added term for your
Right.
maximum likelihood estimates.
It becomes, yeah, if it's a prior, then it becomes a mapped estimate. Right.
You do the log likelihood, and then you add this term, and you're
Right.
trying to minimize or maximize.
Right. Okay. So let me go to what I had. Yeah, I thought I would take longer with that, but I just rushed through it. Okay. Let's see what this was. Okay. Right, so thus far we saw that. So the beta given tau is usually Gaussian. We usually put it as Gaussian. But then there are these choices for what you could do as a hyperprior on tau. Right? So yeah, when I'm saying it's no hyperprior, does not mean that I'm not computing tau. You can still compute tau. So I will come to type 2 maximum likelihood. Has he done that in class? Type 2 maximum likelihood? Okay. Yeah, but then you don't have a hyperprior on tau. So it looks like Bayesian bridge regression. Right? When you have an exponential hyperprior, it gives you the Laplacian penalty, and it's the adaptive sparsity model, which Figueredo does. And then you have the Jeffreys hyperprior, which gives you a log. Right? So you have these choices. Now, I would also, maybe if you guys are interested, you should look at tipping. Like even the sparse, even Figueredo's paper is also motivated, a lot of it is motivated from tipping's paper. And it's a much longer paper, but it's a good paper to look at. He also explains the concept of ARD quite nicely. But then he chooses like the hyperprior on tau as a gamma distribution, right? Now, gamma, when A and B are like, I don't know whether it's half-half or 1-1, it becomes the exponential prior, right? So gamma is a more general distribution. I think it's half-half, I'm not sure, yeah, and I need to confirm. But then some parameters of AB gives me the second case, right? And then to make it non-informative, this gets closer to 0, right? As in, these are details you can check in that paper. But this is just, the whole point is here, you could also choose some other hyperprior here. That's not the point of ARD. This is the example he chooses gamma. Yeah, but the main idea here is don't marginalize tau to find the P of beta, prior distribution. Right? So that's the point there.
So it looks like the gamma distribution is the conjugate prior when you have that known.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, in this case, tau here is 1 over sigma squared.
Right. We don't know the variance, but we do know the mean, which is 0, which is
right.
Using the gamma.
Right. Yeah. So if you're using sigma squared, which is the inverse gamma, you would use the inverse gamma distribution as a conjugate prior. Right. But yeah, tau precision, you would use the gamma prior as the distribution. But then when A and B get closer and closer to 0, this becomes non-informative, uniform distribution. Right. So the difference here is that instead of finding P of beta, you want to find out an estimate for tau, right? And use that in your analysis to find estimates for beta. Okay? So yeah, you're not, and this procedure, the way you would do it is called type 2 maximum likelihood. Okay? So what is type 2 maximum likelihood? You are maximizing the marginal likelihood. So here I have no beta in this distribution. P of y given tau, I think I have sigma square and tau. Actually, you should just, never mind, forget the sigma square. You're just marginalizing P of y given tau. It does not have any beta. See that, okay? So your likelihood is P of y given beta tau, right? So your likelihood is P of y given, right? And then you have a prior, which is P of tau. And the marginal likelihood is P of y given tau.
Prior should be on beta, right?
Oh, sorry, minus. Yeah, beta given tau. And yeah, you will have a P of tau.
That will become joint distribution.
Right. Okay. But then the marginal likelihood says that so the question you're asking here is what is the value of tau which will maximize this line? Okay? Does that make sense? So like find me tau which maximizes this line. What is the best value of tau which maximizes this line? And so there are two things here. Sometimes you may be able to, forget about sigma square, sometimes you may be able to compute this, sometimes maybe not. So you approximate. Right? Are there any questions? What is something not clear? Yeah.
The main motivation for not marginalizing tau is if it is because the integral is hard to calculate.
Right.
How is not marginalizing tau better than setting up a Markov chain to generate samples and doing multi-column estimate?
It's so you could do that also. I mean, yeah, that's also a possibility. But
Does this come with more guarantees for closer to the? Does it give me a better estimate, or does it like save me runtime?
it saves you time for sure. That's one thing. I'm just trying. I don't know about guarantees. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that it saves you time. That was my first thing sampling. But yeah, because a lot of the times your distribution may not have normalizing constants in each sample. So the integral is it's actually this is also the evidence. Yeah, this is also called the evidence of the hyperparameters. So hyperparameter here is tau, and so then this is the normalizing constant for a distribution according to Bayesian. Yeah.
I think this one will give guarantees as compared to Markov chain approach.
No, I mean there
Because
are
there
other.
is something involved, and we are always like it should converge to the right estimate, but there are no guarantees.
I mean, you can talk
Simply
about
Bayesian.
guarantees there in like a probabilistic way.
Yeah.
So it's not that you can't do that, but why is this better? Right now I can only come up with the fact that this is quicker because you're doing whether it's a better estimate than that. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but maybe I'll look it up and I'll come back to you with that.
What's the sigma squared in that equation?
Oh yeah, the sigma square. There was a mistake. So it's just tau.
Just that.
Yeah,
Okay, fine.
yeah, forget about sigma square. But yeah, that is a possibility. You can sample from a distribution, and if that's possible.
I'm not a big fan of sampling. I had tough time with sampling tuning.
I have a lot of sampling in my. I have to do a lot of Hamiltonian Monte Carlo sampling. I think Tom's done this in class, and I have to So one thing I work on is my data, my Y. The Y here is usually shapes, and I'm trying to sample on shape space, and it's crazy. I mean, there are lots of problems I have trying to. But anyway, but then yeah, sampling has its. A lot of times that's all you can do. That's one thing, but you don't have closed form for anything. But yeah, there are lots of nice things even in the sampling side of things. Right, but yeah, the other second point here is that what does this give you ultimately? So it gives me values of tau. So now when I say tau, there is a tau for each beta parameter, right? So I have say 10 regressors, right? So I have 10 tau values, and each of those tau values reflect some value of beta. Now, what will happen is some of these taus will go off to infinity, right? If I was using the sigma square parameterization, sigma square will be tending to 0, right? Oh, my mistake, there should be a sigma square. Sigma square is the noise model. Sigma square is epsilon, the epsilon model. So you have a line, yeah, sorry. So I have a line, I have data, right? So it's the epsilon, that distribution. So that is the parameter of sigma square. Tau is for the prior of the parameters. It's the precision parameter of my Gaussian on the prior. So that's why you have to tau at sigma square.
Or if you don't know what your variance of your data is.
So you can put a prior in that as well. Right, you can estimate it. So actually that can also be part of this. So when I say most probable value of tau, I can put it together and say most probable values of my hyperparameters. And hyperparameter is tau at sigma square. Right? And then you want to do a maximization of the marginal likelihood with respect to both tau and sigma square.
And you use stochastic gradient descent with this, or
You could use regular gradient descent for this. For instance, yeah, if you have a functional form of that, if you have a closed functional form of that, you could do, you could write down the gradient and you could do gradient descent. That's one way of doing it. If you don't have a closed form for that P of y given tau sigma square, you can do EM, expectation maximization. Okay, so you would maximize the complete log likelihood, and then you maximize the expected log likelihood, and then you can and the expectation will have a closed form. Does that make sense? Is there any? Is it too vague? Other questions?
The idea for prior is to somehow inject prior experience
Right.
into the model.
Right.
It looks like in this case we are estimating prior from the data itself. I mean, we are extracting the prior knowledge from the data. Some sense.
Right.
so, or at least the behavior.
It's what we do in Jeffrey's prior.
Yeah, in Jeffrey's prior also you do that because you're writing down Fisher information, and that also has that information, which is you're trying to maximize expected log of the likelihood there as well. Not log. Actually, it's a
Yes, log.
derivative of log or something. Yeah. Right.
Pure prior.
So yeah, so type 2 maximum likelihood is also general. There are two possible ways. In the sense that if you don't have a form for this function, right? If you don't have a form for this function, you can write down the expected log likelihood and you can maximize that. Okay. So I don't know, has Tom done expectation maximization class? Okay. So then, yeah, so you could do that. And then you can compute what tau in sigma square is. And then depending on, you sometimes have to do it until convergence, because tau and sigma square will not converge. This is for that iteration. But yeah, that's depending on what problem you're trying to solve. Okay? Yeah, but the main takeaway here is that once in every iteration, right, this tau, some of these taus will keep going off farther and farther away. They will go off to infinity, which just says that my precision of that specific beta is high, so it's going to peak about 0. The beta of the coefficient of that regressor is going to peak about 0. Right? Is that clear? Okay. Right. So that's. Right. So this is actually this is related to a presentation I gave a week ago at the conference. So I'm just going to talk about that. Right. So then, so one of the applications I look at is Huntington's disease. Right.
Where does this relevance come?
Right. So yeah, I should have mentioned that. But thanks for doing that. So yeah. So I talked about this, right? So the ones which don't go off to infinity are the relevant covariates or regressors or predictors, right? So the ones which go off to infinity are peaking about 0 do not matter to the model. They're irrelevant. So yeah, I should have mentioned. Makes sense? Okay. Yeah. So tipping and the other paper is a very good reference. Tipping especially is a very nice paper to read. It's not very terse. He explains a lot of the reasons, as in what are you really maximizing, why are you so the reason why you actually do this and why does that make sense. There is actually a section there which does that, but I could have gone into that, so I could have written down, so there is this hyperparameter posterior. When I say hyperparameter posterior, it's basically the distribution of tau and sigma square, and that can be written as a bunch of other probability functions, and you want to find the most probable values of the hyperparameter posterior, which include the map estimate or mode of that. And why is that a good thing to do? Why is that a good approximation? So tipping does that quite nicely. Right. Okay. So yeah, one of the applications I look at is Huntington's disease. So the picture here shows CAG repeat length. Okay, CAG is this cytosine, adenine. Anyway, there's these four things which are part of your protein complex, and the CAG repeat length matters a lot in the Huntington's disease. For instance, if there are lots of repeats, so yeah, people with the gene and people with lots of repeats tend to have a higher risk for Huntington's disease, and it's a genetic disease, right? So if your parents have it, you have a 50% chance of having it. And CAG repeats, you can actually come up with a clinical score based on that. Okay, so that's one of the covariates you could have in the model. If you want to say, okay, I want to look at volume change with respect to CAG repeat, something like that. Okay, yeah, and there's no cure. It's over time. What happened? Okay, so yeah, over time. Yeah, this is stolen off from Google. Over time, there is uncontrollable movements, chorea, mental decline. So the data set I look at is this Predict HD data set, where it's a longitudinal data set, which means do people know what longitudinal analysis is? Who knows? Who doesn't know longitudinal analysis? Okay. So longitudinal analysis just means that you are measuring things over time, and you have many subjects in your study. So you have multiple subjects who are healthy, who have disease, and you have measurements over time. Measurements of whatever. It could be MRI scans, it could be shapes, it could be volumes, whatever. Right? So yeah, and in this case we have all this data. We have sex, male, female. You have a diagnosis, which is low, medium, high. Now this was based on the CAC people, this clinical score, and this reflects the probability of onset of HD. Okay? And there are other clinical scores. There are motor scores. There's like brain volume. All of those information, again, is there. So thus far, what people have done in longitudinal shape analysis is they've looked at shape change over time. Oh yeah. So what is shape? That's the first question, right? People know what shape is? People know what shape is? No? Okay. So shape is what remains after you remove translation, rotation, and scale. What does that mean? So if I have a structure, let's say, if I have a structure, let's say one of these structures, for instance, that structure. Okay, you align everything to a common frame of reference. So that means you're removing translation. You're putting them everything at origin. Then you remove scale. Scale in the sense because different people have different sizes. Okay, and that could bias your statistics. So you remove scale, and then you align everything, rotation. In some applications, size matters. So for instance, if you're studying growth of like a baby, and you're studying growth of certain structures, and that size matters a lot. But then when you're studying people who are older, size doesn't seem to matter. It might just be an extra bias, a confounding factor in the analysis. Okay? So, and I'm looking at shape evolution over time. So what people have done is they've developed lots, and there are more papers. They've developed models which change over time. Okay. But then the goal here is, can I include all this extra information? Right? Can I? Does sex bias my statistics? Does it matter that I need to separate? How does a male change versus how does a female change? Is that an important factor? Should I model these separately, low, medium, high? Right? I have several low subjects, several medium subjects, several high subjects. Should I put them all in one box, or should I separate them up and analyze it that way? So it's important to be able to answer these questions, right? So it's nice to have a statistical model which includes all these covariates as well, but statistical shape model. Okay. So we in the previous model selection presentation, we saw that if I add a new covariate, I have a high. Every time I add a new covariate, I have a lot more parameters to estimate, so I need more data. So it becomes hard. And the other thing is p-value fishing, which is several models can give you, as in you can always choose what model is good for you and can publish it. Right? So what we do here is we propose a Bayesian mixed effects shape model which includes covariates, but we also want to do an automatic relevance determination of which covariates are important. Right? We want to put a sparsity plan, same as that, but in the shape case. Like we saw in the variant case, but in the shape case. So this is just an application just to highlight how it could be used. So a little background on mixed effects models. So let's just take a univariate example. Okay, are there any questions at this point? Clarifications? Yeah.
Still not clear on what exactly shape is. Is it just a measure?
Say that again.
I'm still not clear on what exactly shape is. How do you represent it? Is it just a imaginary?
Right. So shape, yeah. So we'll come to what shape representation is. So for me, in my representation, shape is so yeah. If I have so suppose this is my object. I have a surface. I represent my surface of the object by points. It's a surface representation by points, XYZ locations. Okay, and I have several such shapes with XYZ locations, and I do this alignment, which is I first translate everything to the origin, common frame of reference. I remove scale, meaning if I represent this as a long vector, right? So suppose I have 100 points which represent the surface of my shape. I have 300 dimensional vector, okay, and then I normalize it. There's a norm to it, I normalize it. So that means everything is of scale 1. I do this for every shape. And then I align. This is a Procrustes rigid alignment. Does that make sense? So my shape is now scale, everything is of scale 1, everything is in the common frame of reference and aligned. Okay? So size-wise, everything is the same. And all I'm looking at is bending and curving type things. I'm not looking at like things growing. I'm only looking at things which curve and twist and stuff like that. Is that a sort of clearer?
So basically you're mapping everything from your standard shape and then seeing how to represent it.
Yeah, you can say that. Right, so I have a reference shape, I map everything to that, like I translate everything to that, I scale, and then I align everything, and then you can call that, or you can call all those transform objects, and all my analysis are on these transform objects. Okay? Yeah, but my representation is a surface representation with points. There are other kinds of representation. So in my work, like in my research, I have another kind of representation where I represent them on this shape space, which is a manifold. There's a other kind of representation Tom has worked on, which is medial representations. So, like for instance, you can think of a leaf, and then the medial representation. If there is inflections anywhere, you can have it sort of follows the curvature of my leaf. Does that make sense? That's a certain representation, and people do statistics on that. I don't know how good of an example this is, but you can look up medial representation. And there are various representations which people do. Is that okay? Yeah.
How the rotation helps? I mean, like in 2D, if I see your image, it doesn't matter like it's a front or a back.
Right.
If I'm
So.
talking about the shape.
Right. So shape should be invariant to rotation, right? So for instance, So for instance, if I have this chalk, okay. Now, in shape, this chalk is same in this way and in this way, right? And I don't want to distinguish between these two shapes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the scaling when we are doing, we are trying to compare all the images to the same level.
Sure.
But if we do the rotation, that's not, I cannot
So-
predict, like,
So rotation is basically saying that I'm aligning everything. So like he said, if I have a common reference object, right? When I say object, I'm only looking at the same structure. If I have a common reference object, I want to be able to align it so that it's comparable, right? If I have this shape and if I have this shape, it's not really comparable, right? Because this shape is very different from this shape. I mean, if I rotate that, and I want to remove that effect of rotation, I don't want to distinguish between this. I know I'm talking in the air, but yeah, I don't want to distinguish between this and this. It's the same. I know this is different, but this is scaled and rotated. But I want to say that in shape they are the same. So that's why it's important to remove the effects of rotation. Okay. How much time do we have? Yeah, this took longer. Anyway, so yeah, mixed effects model. So now I have data. So if you do a standard linear regression, you can just fit a line to it, you can fit a polynomial to it, and so on. Huh?
That looks kind of useful.
Kind of useless, right? But then now if I tell you that this data is longitudinal, meaning there's correlations between data points. For instance, this is of one subject, this is the same data, this is of one subject, this is of another subject, this is another subject. Right? Individuals are changing in a specific way. I mean, and that is something you want to capture, right? The curve is very different. Right? So, I mean, this is an illustration to show why longitudinal modeling, I mean, there's a separate modeling for longitudinal is important for this regression. So when you have longitudinal data, you cannot just fit a line. It's important to consider relationships between individual points over time, right? So yeah, so you can see there's a huge difference in, I mean, this is just an illustration, but then you can always come up with examples, you can generate data, you come up with examples, and you can always show that there are differences, right? So, and the mixed effects models captures this. So what is mixed effects model? Mixed effects model says that, so I have that red curve, it's a group trend. It says, so for instance, suppose I only have healthy people, and these are all volumes, okay? And this is a trend which represents how the group changes over time, okay? The red trend. And this is what I want to summarize. I want to summarize my data based on a group trend. All the individual trends are perturbations about a group trend, and that perturbation could have any distribution. Predominantly, mixed effects model says that that's a Gaussian distribution. Okay, this is by Laird and Bain. I have cited it. Right? So the alpha represents the fixed effects. It's called fixed effects, and it contains intercept slope. It will also contain covariant information. Right? So, for instance, if I didn't have the ZIBI, right, it's just x alpha plus epsilon. Okay? So, alpha is my coefficients, xi's are my regressors. But now I have this additional layer which says that I need to do this for every individual because I'm interested in the individual model. This says that alpha is a group trend and then beta I are perturbations about that group trend. Okay? And alpha has all this information. It has intercept slope, it has sex, male, female, low, medium, high, and all of that. Okay? And the ultimate goal for me is to find out which of these covariates are relevant. Okay? So yeah, important. So whatever you saw was beta in the first example is alpha. So just note that the notation has changed. I should have been more consistent, but since I had these pictures, I had to. I just kept it. So yeah, what is sparsity here? So my sparsity is now on alpha, and now alpha is a bunch of covariates. So I have say 10 covariates. So I have a Gaussian on each of them. So the joint Gaussian looks like that. Okay. So I have omega 1, omega 2, omega p. So what was tau before is now omega. And then that's a Gaussian distribution. And then now, what am I saying? I have an ARD prior, which means I am going to maximize the marginal likelihood of y given omega. Does that make sense? Is that clear? Because initially I had tau. I had beta given tau, now I have alpha given omega. That's the only difference.
What's the tau in that one?
In this tau represents the sigma square. Yeah. Right, 1 over sigma square. I've written everything in terms of precision.
What's capital D?
Right, so D is, so now I have this, so
It's the
now I have the distribution on beta, and that has covariance structure D. Okay, so that's an extra parameter. And the same thing, when if each of these omegas go to infinity, alpha k's go to 0. Okay. So how am I doing this? Now we're going into the details of how does ARD fit into a whole algorithm, right? So I want to find out, what do I want to find out? I want to find out which alphas are relevant. So the posterior distribution can be written like that. So in univariate case, it turns out that the posterior is Gaussian. Because everything was Gaussian, and you write down everything is nice, you get a Gaussian distribution. And it's Gaussian with parameters alpha hat and a hat. And so what happens? So first, the typical way to do it is you first find tau and d. And the way you do it is by EM. You should go check layered and where. Layered and where is the original paper, they compute tau and d. Tau was the noise precision, D is the covariance structure of D. Once you have tau and D, you can, alpha hat and a hat are in those functions, functions of those things. So you can compute what the posterior mean and the posterior variance, covariance is. And now what do you want to find out? You want to know which alphas matter. So the way you do it is you compute omegas, see which of them are going off to infinity, kill all those alpha terms for which omegas go off to infinity. Okay? If none of them go off to infinity, then use those. When I say infinity, you have to set a threshold. Right? For implementation details, you can set 10 raised to 10 or whatever. If it goes beyond that, you just set alpha to 0, and in future iterations of this algorithm, you just don't compute that alpha at all, don't compute that omega at all. You just compute the rest. Okay? So yeah, when I say repeated convergence, that just means that you're using these values, going and doing that again. Tau and D again depend on these new set of omegas. So everything is dependent on each other. So you just keep alternating. Compute tau D again, compute A hat, alpha hat again, recompute omegas, and then at some point it will converge. It will say some omegas are infinity, some omegas are not. The ones which are not are relevant to T or not. Right, yeah.
Convergence is guaranteed.
Convergence is guaranteed.
Is there some convex structure?
Yeah, there's a convex structure. Actually. Okay. Yeah, expression, yeah, don't worry about the expression. Yeah, you just, I just wrote it out, but anyway, I just wrote the expression because the shape expression is very similar. Okay, I'm doing this in the shape case now. This is now for the univariate setting. So in shape, yeah. So I don't know how clear the picture is, but if you are able to see, there is a bunch of points on the shape. Is that clear? Maybe I should have done this at the beginning of the presentation. So yeah, there are a bunch of points. That's the representation of my shape, and the way I represent it is as a long vector in Euclidean space, and so it's an R and D, where D is my dimension, so 3, and M is the number of points which represent my shape. That's a shape vector, and then the likelihood. So the way to think of this is that each particle has its own univariate model. Is that clear? Each particle has its univariate model. So the whole shape has a joint. Yeah.
So this L basically is for individual particle.
Yeah, individual. So it's not just particles. I have X, Y, Z. So it's for each X, each for Y, it's for Z, and all.
So it's like double product on each variable.
Triple, in this case X, Y, Z. So it's not a triple product really, but I'm looking at first particle X location distribution, Y location distribution, Z location distribution, and then second particle X, Y, Z, and so on. Okay. And again, to remember, alpha represents the fixed effects, which is my group curve. Beta is the perturbation. Okay? And these are now shape parameters. Now, what does the ARD prior here look like? Okay? Now, the prior again is on alpha, but I have now 300. So if I have 100 particles at 3 XYZ locations, I have 300 things to take care of. Right? So I could put a prior on each of those individual things. Right? A sparsity prior on each of those things. The main difference here is that I put the same prior on each of them. Why? Because I want to say, how does the global shape change with, how is it relevant, how is it influenced by sex, how is it influenced by disease, and so on. To say that, I could even say, how is each particle influenced by sex? How is each particle influenced by disease diagnosis? But the question I'm trying to ask is, shape as a whole, how does it change? Which is why I have a single omega. So you'll see that you have L's on everything, right? I have alpha L, but omega remains the same for each particle. And I want to estimate, I want to say that what is the omega which maximizes my marginal likelihood, okay, for the whole sheet. Is that clear? Is there any question? Clarification? And this algorithm proceeds in the same way, but now I have 300 things to compute, like tau L and DL. I have to compute that. I have to compute A hat L and alpha hat L. But then I combine all of them to give me what omega k is. Is that clear?
Why it is not Gaussian?
The whole joint thing is not Gaussian.
I mean the individual things are Gaussian, right?
Right.
So if I product then
That's because there is likelihood of Y, right? And then there is prior alpha, so it does not have to be Gaussian in terms of alpha.
Right, yeah. In terms of alpha, it's not Gaussian. So for instance, if I had on each particle, if I had different yeah, it's it's not Gaussian in terms of alpha. So how do I say that? Yeah, it doesn't give me a form, exponential form.
It's an exponential form.
It's an exponential form, but it doesn't give me
Yeah.
a mean and a variance in that representation, in that high dimensional, in the space of alpha. But the algorithm is again the same. I combine everything to give me one set of omega. I have 10 covariates, I compute an omega, and then I see if this goes up to infinity, push that covariate to 0. Okay? So, right, so experiments. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. So here, yeah, we just included. So this is very similar to the volume experiment you saw for Alzheimer's, right? I have age, I have sex, and then I have, but in this case, the extra thing is I have interaction terms, right? I have age times sex, age times each of the covariates, low, medium, high. And if you go to see that if I just do without an ARD prior, if I just do your standard LME, linear mixed effects model, right? So what we did in the first case was a linear model. There was no subjects, it was not longitudinal, it was just regression. But this is the extension of regression to longitudinal data, which is called mixed effects models, and that function is LME. Okay? And then you can again do the same thing, you can check whether each of these covariates are significant to the model or not, based on just p-values. We're not putting any prior on the hyperparameters. It says that age is significant, the intercept for sex is significant, but the age times sex is not significant. Meaning, what does this mean? This means that the way males change over time and the way females change over time there's no difference between them. Okay? At baseline, the way the male volume and the female volume are different. But over time, the way they change the slope of that, there is not a significant difference between them. Right? Does that make sense? And we will see that corroborated by the ARD prior also. This picture is very messy, but if I did this with the ARD prior, like the way in my algorithm, it deselects or gets rid of the omega for age times sex, goes off to infinity. It just gets removed. Everything else stays. Everything else is important to the model, relevant to the model. And you can see that so at the start, this is for female, that's for male. The starting volume is around 1500. The starting volume here, 15,000, but the starting volume here is about 18,000. Right? But the way they change is not too different. Visually, it's something. Yes, everything is of the same scale. The pictures are of the same scale. So, okay. The other thing is we looked at AIC. Here, in this case, this is the volume result, and there are 10 covariates. So we looked at 2 raised to 10 models and saw which model gave me the lowest AIC. And the model which got chosen here by the ARD prior was exactly the same as what the AIC gives. So that's a good proof of concept that this is the right way to do it. Okay. We did the same thing for shape, and these are Buchanan shapes, and top is female, bottom is male, and we chose again all the covariates, but those two got deselected. It again says that shape change over time for males and for females is roughly similar. It doesn't matter, but the others matter. Okay? And the color coding just says local contractions and expansions. Okay? So, shape change, like I said, it only represents twisting and bending of things. So you could see that the high category had a lot more activity going on compared to the other categories. Okay, and I had a video for it. I don't have it on me right now, but yeah. So that was the shape design, and that's the. Was that? I mean, this is just to show that, like, there are various ways people, like, there was another paper where people use it for gene sequencing, like Tipping, for instance, has a paper where he uses. So yeah, like if I go to the other.
Say if I have a time series data, sets of time series data, they know all these features. Use this and you can remove your shape modeling part of it, how to put in my
You can,
time
yeah,
series.
but then, right, but then the difference is I'm using linear models, right? Oh yeah, in my, in like the work I showed, it was like, I could also introduce higher order polynomials. I don't need to just do lines, I could do quadratic, I could do cubic, I could do interaction terms with quadratic and cubic. So I also did an experiment with that. And it turned out to be irrelevant, meaning those omegas just went off to infinity. It said that, yeah, you don't need as complex as a quadratic or a cubic line is sufficient. Okay? But then in your case, your time series data, if you're dealing with EEG or something, the curve which you fit is probably much more complex than a polynomial or a linear. So you would need some sort of a non-linear model, right? So your parameters will be different, but then it's a non-linear. So, but then you could still use a similar concept, except your y will be a function of a non-linear thing plus noise, right? And there is a longitudinal model called nonlinear mixed effects model, which you can look up if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not sure. When you say time series, you have constant data all the time, right?
Yes.
So, right, but then it's
basically a solution of 3D over a grid.
okay.
And simulation is running for, let's say, 1 hour.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether you need to truncate your time and then look at a function in that interval. Or can you just keep doing it? Suppose you have 100 time steps, and then your function goes up, goes down. If it's like an EEG curve, there's a spike that goes down, spike goes down. Yeah, I don't know how you. Yeah, it depends on what kind of function you want.
It could still be linear in some space. So transform it to.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about like kernelized networks. Right. So yeah, the other thing I was going to just note one. What was I going to say? Yeah, you could have a nonlinear function. Are there any questions? Yeah.
In the application of the last one, we said that we check about the CAG length of the protein.
Right.
So how does, I mean, when do we have taken that into consideration, or
So the
is there
CAG
any
length, right. So I did not include this. So like I did not include that clinical score. So CAG, it gives you the score called the CAP score. Okay, and we have in our data we have values for CAP score for each person. So over time, this CAP score also goes up. So CAP is a function of age, and it's a function of CAG length.
So basically, it is like a function of these parameters, which
Yeah, it's some function of these like age and CAG length, repeat length. So it's a clinical score, and then you can do a regression with respect to CAP score. Okay, I didn't do that here, but that is something you could do, right? So to see whether shape change is correlated with cap score versus age.
It would.
It's not clear. So, and yeah, it's still something which needs to be looked at. Are there any questions, comments, clarifications? Okay, I think we can. Thanks.